Sarah pressed her hands tightly against her mouth, suppressing screams that clawed at the edges of her throat. Beneath the creaking floorboards, she lay motionless, dust and darkness surrounding her like a shroud. Each heartbeat thudded painfully against her ribs, an agonizing drumbeat of terror. Her eyes, wide with shock, stared helplessly upward, peering through thin cracks at the flickering firelight dancing across the cabin walls. Shadows moved swiftly, cruel voices barking orders, punctuated by bursts of laughter as savage as the flames consuming her home. The sound of shattering glass pierced Sarah's heart. Her father's gruff shout cut through the chaos, brief and defiant, silenced abruptly by the cold, unmistakable crack of gunfire. She flinched, eyes squeezing shut, a desperate sob choked deep within her. More screams followed, her mother, her sister, all brutally cut short in quick succession. Silence descended like a blade. She shuddered violently, feeling the tears seep into her clenched fingers, mingling with dirt and ash. Forcing herself to breathe quietly, Sarah fought down nausea as booted feet stomped overhead, heavy, careless, leaving behind destruction in their wake. "Search it all. No one lives," growled a voice, rough and full of menace. Sarah's muscles stiffened, blood pulsed in her ears, blurring her thoughts, reducing her world to the cold dread pooling in her stomach. Above, which splintered as furniture was tossed aside. Every nerve screamed for her to run, but terror rooted her to the spot, frozen beneath their very feet. Minutes passed like hours, her muscles aching, fingers trembling from strain. Gradually, silence returned to cabin. Sarah's ears strained desperately, praying it was over. Just as hope flickered weakly inside her, the floorboards creaked ominously. The dust overhead shifted as footsteps neared her hiding place. Sarah's eyes widened, fear knifed through her chest. Her heartbeat became painfully loud, threatening betrayal. A shadow bent closer, blocking the light. She saw a boot, leather-worn and cracked, mere inches from her hiding place. Her breath hitched sharply. Then, abruptly, from outside came a deep, commanding voice, resonant with strength. "They have escaped toward the river. Leave it." Another voice barked harshly above her. The boots shifted impatiently, then moved away. Sarah lay trembling as footsteps retreated, fading into the distance, replaced by the faint crackling of flames and the distant murmur of fading voices. Still, she waited, limbs cramped and numb, until darkness deepened, swallowing the ember's dying glow. Only then did she dare move, sliding quietly from beneath the floor. Every step across the charred cabin floor sent ripples of pain through her body, grief overwhelming her anew at each familiar sight, now reduced to ruin. Stepping outside into the bitter night air, Sarah's breath plumed softly as she gazed upon the desolation. Flames had turned her peaceful village to smoldering ashes. Bodies lay scattered in unnatural stillness. Stifling another sob, she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the immensity of her loss. Movement flickered at the edge of her vision. Heart jolting violently, Sarah whirled, expecting death. Instead, a solitary figure stood silently by the shattered barn. Moonlight outlined broad shoulders draped in animal furs, a tall, powerful presence watching her. His face was painted in muted earth tones, the markings stark beneath dark, piercing eyes. Sarah scrambled backward, fear surging again, her hand closing around a jagged piece of splintered wood. "Stay away." Her voice cracked weakly, betraying desperation more than strength. The figure raised one hand calmly, signaling peace. "I mean no harm," he spoke softly, voice deep yet surprisingly gentle. Who are you?" Sarah managed, voice shaking with suspicion and grief. "I am Lone Eagle, chief of the Cheyenne. Your enemies have fled, but they may return soon." His gaze swept across the smoldering village, lingering upon her trembling form. "You cannot stay here. I can't leave them." Her voice was scarcely audible, thickened by sorrow. "They are no longer here," Lone Eagle said gently, taking a cautious step toward her. "But you still breathe." His eyes, dark with sincerity, held hers steadily. Sarah hesitated, the raw wounds in her heart screaming protest, yet survival urged her forward. "Why, help me," she whispered bitterly. "I'm nobody." Lone Eagle regarded her solemnly, his voice carrying quiet strength. No life is nobody. Come, we must leave before more danger finds us. A sudden shout erupted in the distance, breaking the fragile peace. Lone Eagle turned sharply, alert, muscles tensed. Quickly, he commanded, urgency thickening his voice. Sarah, driven by instinct and dread, hurried to his side, heart racing. Lone Eagle lifted her easily onto his waiting horse before climbing behind her. She stiffened momentarily, panic briefly overwhelming her, yet the warmth and steadiness of his presence soothed her frayed nerves. The horse surged forward, powerful strides swiftly carrying him away from devastation into sheltering shadows of the forest. Sarah clung desperately to the horse's mane, breath shallow, pulse hammering. She glanced backward once, grief choking her as the burning remnants of her home faded from sight. Time blurred, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of hooves and branches snapping overhead. Finally, they halted within a moonlit clearing fringed by tall pines. Lone Eagle dismounted gracefully, offering Sarah his hand. "We rest here," he murmured, voice cautious yet reassuring. Sarah slid down unsteadily, legs trembling beneath her. He guided her gently to a sheltered spot, offering her water from a pouch. "Drink. Gather strength," he instructed quietly. Sarah drank deeply, throat raw, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking, vulnerable beneath his steady gaze. Lone Eagle nodded solemnly, eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You have shown strength tonight," he said softly. "You will need more in days ahead." As the moon rose higher, casting silver threads across the clearing, Sarah wrapped her arms tightly around herself, haunted by memories yet comforted by the quiet guardian at her side. Tomorrow loomed uncertain, perilous, but she was no longer alone. And deep within, despite her grief and terror, hope sparked gently to life once more. Lone Eagle crouched low, gently placing dried tinder into a small, carefully dug pit. He moved with deliberate grace, his hands precise and calm, every gesture communicating confidence. Sarah watched in the shadow of a boulder, her knees drawn tight against her chest, eyes wide and wary, exhausted from their relentless escape. "Do you fear me?" Lone Eagle asked without turning, his voice low yet clear in the quiet night. Sarah hesitated, her throat dry. I don't know," she confessed softly. "I don't even know who to fear anymore." Lone Eagle's lips twitched faintly into a half-smile as he ignited the tinder, nurturing it patiently until flames danced warmly beneath his fingertips. "Sometimes trust is forged in fire," he murmured thoughtfully, glancing briefly at her. "Danger teaches us quickly who can be trusted." Sarah considered his words, warmth slowly seeping back into her chill bones. Silence stretched comfortably between them, broken only by the snapping twigs and distant whispers of night creatures. Gradually, curiosity overcame fear. She leaned forward, her voice tentative yet firm. "Why did you come to our village?" He met her gaze steadily, firelight flickering across the painted symbols on his face, accentuating the quiet strength beneath. "Your village had an agreement with my people. Protection for trade. My scouts warned of danger. I arrived too late." Regret darkened his eyes, revealing a rare vulnerability beneath the stoic facade. Sarah swallowed the lump of grief tightening her throat, fingers trembling as she reached toward the fire. Her pale skin glowed warmly against the darkness. "Did you lose someone too?" Lone Eagle's eyes softened briefly, shadows deepening on his brow. "Long ago. I know the pain you carry." Sarah drew a shuddering breath, comforted by his quiet acknowledgement. The silence returned, heavier this time, laden with mutual understanding. Finally, Lone Eagle rose gracefully, motioning to fire. "Rest," he urged gently. "Tomorrow holds many dangers." Sarah curled beside the warmth, weariness pulling her swiftly into restless dreams. Lone Eagle kept watch, his vigilant gaze scanning the darkened trees beyond. Morning arrived sharply, sunlight filtering through thick branches like golden arrows. Sarah woke abruptly, heart racing at unfamiliar surroundings before memory steadied her. Lone Eagle stood ready, gathering belongings swiftly, alert eyes scanning their surroundings constantly. "We must move," he said, urgency edging his voice. "Bandits track well, They will not rest until they find survivors. Sarah nodded anxiously, scrambling to her feet. They traveled swiftly, weaving between trees and dense brush, leaving minimal traces behind. Lone Eagle moved silently, each step intentional, teaching Sarah quietly through example how to conceal their passage. Hours later, pausing only briefly to sip water from a cold stream, Lone Eagle stiffened suddenly. His keen gaze shifted sharply to the east, ears attuned to subtle shifts in the forest's whisper. Sarah froze beside him, instinctively sensing danger. "What?" She began softly, silenced immediately by Lone Eagle's raised hand. He whispered tersely, "Men coming. Quiet." Adrenaline surged through Sarah's veins as Lone Eagle swiftly guided her behind a rocky outcrop. Pressing his back against the stone, his knife drawn soundlessly, Sarah's pulse thundered loudly in her ears, every nerve screaming tension as distant voices grew nearer. "Tracks lead this way," came a harsh, unmistakable voice. Jed Carson, the ruthless leader of the raiders. Sarah's blood chilled instantly, dread clenching her chest. Fearfully, she met Lone Eagle's calm gaze. He nodded reassuringly, silently commanding trust. She drew courage from his unwavering steadiness. Footsteps drew closer, voices louder, rough laughter ringing sharply. Sarah's trembling hand covered her mouth, desperate to stifle fearful breaths. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A shout pierced the tense stillness. The bandits spotted their footprints near the stream. Lone Eagle exploded into action, fluid and decisive. Springing from concealment, he attacked fiercely, blade flashing lethally, movement swift and brutal. Sarah stared in horror, heart hammering violently. A bandit lunged forward, blade swinging viciously toward Lone Eagle's blind side. "No!" Sarah screamed instinctively, heart overriding fear. She grabbed a heavy branch and swung wildly, connecting solidly with the attacker's skull. He collapsed, stunned. Lone Eagle dispatched another swiftly, the final bandit retreating in panic. Breathing harshly, Lone Eagle turned, eyes blazing admiration at Sarah's courage. "You saved me," he acknowledged gravely, chest heaving. She dropped the branch, hands shaking violently. I could have watched them take you, too," she gasped breathlessly. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, voice warm with gratitude and pride. "You acted bravely. Few would." Sarah met his gaze fiercely, emboldened by newfound strength. Lone Eagle smiled faintly, respect deepening his dark eyes. Yet his features grew serious again as he touched his side, revealing blood seeping from a deep gash. "You're hurt," Sarah gasped, alarm returning sharply. He shook his head stoically. "It is nothing." "You're bleeding," she insisted firmly, newfound confidence pushing her forward. "Please let me help." Reluctantly, Lone Eagle sank onto a nearby log, eyes watchful yet allowing trust. Sarah tore strips from her sleeve, hand steadied by determination. Carefully, she cleaned the wound, marveling silently at his calm endurance. "Why risk yourself for me?" she whispered finally, breaking the tense silence. He studied her thoughtfully, sincerity woven through his deep voice. "Courage and honor are bound together. You showed both. You are worth protecting." Emotion swelled within her chest, hope blossoming amidst uncertainty. She tied the cloth securely, satisfied, feeling inexplicably lighter despite lingering danger. "We must keep moving," Lone Eagle finally stated, rising with effort, determination etching his face. Sarah stood beside him resolutely, heart stronger than before. They resumed their journey, bonded deeper by shared danger and sacrifice. Evening approached swiftly, shadows lengthening across the wilderness. Lone Eagle chose shelter carefully beneath a protective outcrop, securing a defensible spot. Sarah nestled beside him, grateful for his calm presence. As stars illuminated the darkening sky, Lone Eagle murmured quietly, voice tinged with pride, "Today you learned strength. Tomorrow, perhaps survival." Sarah met his gaze, determined yet softened by trust newly forged. "I'll follow wherever you lead," she whispered resolutely. His steady gaze warmed subtly, respect clear as he replied quietly, "Then together we may yet survive." Sarah awoke sharply, every muscle tense by the brittle silence that surrounded their makeshift camp. Lone Eagle was already upright, crouched low, eyes narrowed intently into shadows beyond their hidden sanctuary. His breathing steady, but Sarah saw the slight twitch of his hand gripping the hilt of his knife. Danger was near. She sat up silently, heart hammering within her ribs. Lone Eagle turned swiftly, raising one hand to urge silence. Moonlight cast an eerie glow across his stoic features. A twig cracked sharply somewhere close, followed by muted laughter, a sound that sent ice cascading through Sarah's veins. "Raiders," Lone Eagle whispered grimly. "They tracked us." Fear surged like acid in her throat. She had hoped they were free from pursuit, yet evil persisted, relentless. Lone Eagle motioned urgently, guiding Sarah silently to a deeper thicket nearby. Carefully positioning himself in front of her, blade unsheathed, eyes scanning with ruthless precision. Moments crawled by with unbearable tension. Leaves rustled. Figures emerged from darkness. Jed Carson, the ruthless outlaw leader, and his crew surrounded them like wolves encircling prey. "Well, ain't this a cozy sight?" Jed sneered, voice thick with mockery. The brave chief babysitting the helpless girl. Sarah stiffened, humiliation mingling with dread. Lone Eagle stood tall, expression unreadable, though Sarah recognized the fury simmering beneath his quiet composure. Jed stepped closer, arrogance etched deep into his rugged face. His revolver gleamed cruelly in the dim light, casually trained upon Lone Eagle's chest. "You're a slippery one, Chief. Nearly lost your trail twice. Can't let that happen again. You will regret this," Lone Eagle replied calmly, voice low, measured. Jed laughed harshly, eyes glinting with cold amusement. "No, Chief, you will." Before Lone Eagle could react, one of the outlaws lunged from behind, slamming a rifle but brutally into his ribs. Lone Eagle staggered forward, gasping sharply, yet refusing to fall. Another blow landed heavily across his shoulders, finally forcing him to his knees. Sarah cried out, moving impulsively forward. "Stop. Please, don't hurt him." Jed glanced contemptuously toward her, amusement turning malicious. Well, seems the little mouse found some courage." His eyes flicked darkly between her and Lone Eagle. "Let's test just how strong that courage is." Jed motioned sharply. Two men dragged Lone Eagle roughly forward, forcing him to kneel again at Jed's feet. Sarah's chest tightened painfully at the proud defiance blazing in Lone Eagle's eyes, unbroken despite the brutal treatment. "You care about this savage, girl?" Jed sneered mockingly. "Show me how much. Beg." Sarah hesitated, humiliation burning fiercely within her, but Lone Eagle shook his head subtly, a silent command. "Do not surrender." Gritting her teeth, she straightened defiantly. "You're a coward hiding behind your men," she spat, voice trembling but firm. "That makes you less than him." Jed's smile vanished, replaced by simmering rage. He grabbed her roughly, yanking her closer, his breath hot against her cheek. "You'll regret those words." "Release her," Lone Eagle demanded, voice dangerously low. Jed chuckled bitterly, nodding toward his men. "Chain them both." Heavy chains clinked ominously as iron shackles snapped around Sarah's wrists, metal cold against her skin. Lone Eagle was chained beside her, yet his eyes remained fierce, strength unyielding despite their grim predicament. They were dragged mercilessly through the darkness to a secluded cave hidden within jagged hills. The air inside was thick, damp, oppressive, a prison carved by nature. Sarah's stomach twisted in dread as they were thrown roughly onto the cavern floor. "You both stay put," Jed mocked cruelly. "We'll decide your fate at dawn." The cave entrance sealed with heavy timber, plunging them into total darkness. Sarah's breath quickened in panic, chains rattling with each trembling movement. Lone Eagle shifted nearer, voice quiet yet strong through shadows. "Stay calm," he murmured reassuringly. "Fear weakens mind and body. Focus." Sarah drew shaky breaths, heart racing. "I'm sorry," she whispered miserably, guilt piercing deeper than iron. "This is my fault." "No," Lone Eagle corrected firmly, voice steady despite pain. "We stand together. Remember that." She felt hot tears burn her eyes, grief blending with admiration for his unwavering courage. They remained quiet, hours stretching painfully, each second punctuated by dread and uncertainty. Eventually, footsteps returned heavily, timber scraping as the cave reopened. Dawn light pierced painfully into their prison, illuminating Jed's cruel face, rifle in hand. "Your people gonna pay ransom for you, Chief?" Jed taunted, voice dripping mockery. "Or do I shoot you here?" Lone Eagle stared defiantly, silent. Jed snarled angrily, frustrated by the warrior's stubborn resolve. He turned his weapon sharply towards Sarah, aiming coldly. "Perhaps she'll loosen your tongue." Sarah's heart froze, eyes wide, pulse deafening. Lone Eagle surged forward, chain straining as his deep voice cracked fiercely. "Harm her, and no mercy awaits you." Jed laughed bitterly. "Oh, Chief, there's no mercy left in these lands." A sudden distant shout interrupted abruptly. A commotion outside, frantic voices raised. Jed cursed bitterly, turning sharply toward the entrance. "Stay here," he barked at his men, stepping outside urgently. Chaos ensued. Lone Eagle seized opportunity instantly, summoning hidden strength, hurling his full weight into the nearest guard, chains tightening viciously around the man's neck. Sarah reacted instinctively, clawing desperately at another captor's face, blinded by fear yet fueled by resolve. The brief violence ended swiftly. Both captors lay unconscious at their feet. Lone Eagle snatched keys from one guard's belt, swiftly freeing Sarah's wrists, then his own. Outside, frantic shouts grew louder, Jed's voice furiously ordering pursuit. Lone Eagle grasped Sarah's hand urgently, determination blazing fiercely within his eyes. "Now we fight for freedom," he declared resolutely. "Together." Sarah met his gaze fiercely, fear tempered by newfound courage. She nodded firmly, ready. The cave's darkness fell behind them as they stepped boldly into the rising dawn. Chains shattered, fear conquered, trust stronger than ever. Danger waited, but they would face it side by side. Sunrise broke fiercely over the Cheyenne village, washing the sprawling encampment in brilliant shades of amber and gold. Sarah rode alongside Lone Eagle, her heart heavy with exhaustion, yet buoyed by gratitude as they crested the ridge overlooking his people's land. Below, clusters of teepees dotted the landscape, trails of smoke spiraling skyward, signaling home, safety, and uncertainty. As they entered the village, wary eyes watched their arrival. Curious whispers rippled among the tribe, questions held at bay only by Lone Eagle's stern yet reassuring presence. Sarah felt their cautious suspicion like a weight pressing upon her shoulders, but she straightened her spine, drawing confidence from the man riding steadfastly beside her. Gray Wolf, the respected elder, stepped forward, his weathered features carved deeply by years of leadership. His penetrating gaze flicked between Lone Eagle and Sarah, sharp with scrutiny. "You return alive, Lone Eagle, yet you bring an outsider to our fires." Gray Wolf questioned sternly, his voice commanding yet calm. "She fought bravely beside me," Lone Eagle answered firmly, eyes never wavering. "She has earned our protection." Murmurs of surprise echoed softly through the crowd, tension building. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she stood silent, meeting Gray Wolf's intense stare. After a long pause, the elder gave a slight, approving nod. "Bravery earns respect." "She may remain," Gray Wolf pronounced finally. The tribe, though hesitant, accepted his wisdom. Days passed swiftly, each sunrise drawing Sarah deeper into the rhythm of village life. She learned quickly, absorbing their customs eagerly, her resilience impressing even the sternest skeptics. Lone Eagle observed silently, pride shining subtly in his dark eyes with each challenge she overcame. One crisp autumn evening, beneath stars blazing coldly above, Lone Eagle found Sarah near the riverbank. She gazed thoughtfully into the gentle flow, moonlight illuminating her thoughtful expression. "You are restless tonight," he said quietly, approaching slowly, careful not to startle her solitude. Sarah smiled softly, warmth blossoming at his presence. "I was thinking how strange it feels. Weeks ago, I thought life held only loss." Lone Eagle sat beside her, the quiet intimacy comforting. "Life tests us in cruel ways," he reflected gently. but pain shaped strength. You are proof. She looked earnestly into his eyes, vulnerability unmasked. Yet, I couldn't have survived without you. He studied her intently, expressions softening in rare openness. Strength is shared, Sarah. You gave me courage too. Their hands touched softly beneath the starlit sky, warmth exchanging silently in the cool night air, bonds forged deeply through adversity. Unspoken affection lingered delicately between them, mutual respect blooming into something far richer. Suddenly, piercing shouts shattered the peaceful silence. The sharp cries of scouts burst urgently from a village perimeter. Lone Eagle sprang to his feet instantly, eyes narrowing fiercely. Pawnee warriors, he hissed urgently, pulling Sarah swiftly toward the safety of camp. They come seeking blood. Chaos exploded violently throughout the village. Arrows streaked the sky, embedding viciously into teepees and scattering panicked villagers. Sarah's heart pounded frantically as she followed Lone Eagle into the fray. The Cheyenne warriors responded swiftly, yet the assault was fierce, driven by relentless vengeance. Lone Eagle's voice thundered commands amid the turmoil, rallying his men courageously. Sarah seized a fallen weapon instinctively, driven by fierce loyalty. Fear dissolved, replaced by determination to defend the home she'd grown to cherish. An enemy warrior charged forward, blade gleaming wickedly. Sarah ducked sharply, narrowly evading his strike, before swinging desperately, knocking him sprawling. Breathlessly, she turned, glimpsing Lone Eagle locked in brutal combat, outnumbered yet fighting with deadly precision. Lone Eagle! Sarah cried desperately, rushing toward him as a Pawnee warrior lunged at his exposed back. Without hesitation, she thrust herself between them, parrying the savage blow, her arms trembling violently beneath the weight of the attacker's fury. Lone Eagle reacted swiftly, spinning around and ending the threat decisively. His eyes locked fiercely upon Sarah's, gratitude and alarm intertwined. You risk too much, he breathed heavily. For you always, she answered resolutely, her voice steady despite racing heartbeat. Renewed by their bond, they battled tirelessly until Pawnee finally retreated, their raid thwarted, yet devastation lingered heavily in their wake. Fires smoldered, cries echoed painfully. Sarah sank wearily beside Lone Eagle, surveying the hard-won victory with exhausted relief. Gray Wolf approached solemnly, his expression somber yet deeply respectful. He placed a gentle hand upon Sarah's shoulder, an unprecedented gesture of acceptance. You fought bravely, daughter, he pronounced gravely. You are truly one of us. Sarah's chest swelled with pride and emotion, gratitude overwhelming her. She met Lone Eagle's approving gaze, feeling an unspoken promise etched deeply between them. Night settled gently once more, smoke dissipating into moonlight. Lone Eagle guided Sarah quietly away from devastation, seeking solace near the riverbank again, the place their hearts first connected. Tonight proved the strength within you, he murmured, voice tender yet fierce. Yet you must never risk your life again for mine. She met his gaze passionately, defiance softening into quiet affection. Your life means everything to me. His eyes softened deeply, barriers falling gently away, leaving him vulnerable in ways she'd never imagined possible. Then, together we shall protect each other always. In that quiet moment, beneath countless stars, he drew her gently closer, their embrace a silent vow against future storms. Sarah felt peace envelop her, wounds of past sorrows healed by newfound love and purpose. We survived cruelty and loss, Lone Eagle whispered tenderly. Now we choose courage and hope. Sarah smiled softly against his chest, heart full, burdens finally lifted by shared strength. They stood united beneath infinite skies, resolved to face whatever darkness lay ahead, their lives irrevocably intertwined. Danger had tested them mercilessly, but trust forged in fire endured unbroken. Through love and survival, they had discovered something profoundly rare, the unyielding courage to build life anew, together.